千里之行，始于足下。A journey of 1,000 miles begins beneath the feet. We now gather in the Tao to travel the journey together. Welcome to Tao Talks with Derek Lin, where we take a deep dive into the Tao Te Ching by Lao Tzu. I would like to extend a warm welcome to you. Thank you for joining us. I would like to invite you to center your thoughts and direct your attention to this moment in time, to the here and now, to be fully present and mindfully aware as we all ready ourselves for the sacred process in the Tao with one another. Now, without further ado, let's get right back into Tao Te Ching 14. This is the Tao Axiom chapter. As we discussed previously, the term Tao Axiom refers to the primary principle of the Tao. It is the great truth of spirituality that remains unchanged throughout eternity. Everything changes in the universe, but the Tao is forever constant. Reflected in this, it just means that you and I face our ever-changing world by holding the eternal Tao within us. We practice the virtues and Tao cultivation constantly. Let's take a look at the chapter itself. A longer chapter than the ones that we have looked at previously. 21 lines. We divided it up into 3 major sections, and in section 1 and 2, we further divided it into to single out the 2 lines that end and begin them. So as you can see, from line 1 to line 8, we have the first section, but then from 1 to 6, we have a structure that we can see with the highlighting, where we note a poetic construction. Then the 2 lines following that are the concluding remarks for the section. Section 2 begins with 2 lines that are of the similar kind of poetic construction, 4 characters each, with 2 characters repeating from line 9 to line 10. And then at the end of this section, we have another poetic construction with 4 out of 6 characters repeating, as you can see there, and you can also see their corresponding translation. And finally, we have our concluding section, which is the 3rd section. Then I also pointed out that line 13, line 15, and the last line, line 21, all begin with the same 2 characters translated as it is called, this is called. So that is the hidden structure of the original text. Original text in classical Chinese that was used in ancient times. Now, what did we talk about last time? Let's do a quick recap. Previously, we were able to go from line 1 to line 8, concluding the first section. What were they about? The first recap is about how the Tao cannot be seen. It is called colorless. To say that it's colorless means that it is not visible like material things are in the material world. It harkens back to the metaphor or the analogy, the description of the 5 colors, which were not literally 5 colors, but represented all the things that one could see in the physical world. It's making the point that all these things that we're able to perceive with the eyes are colorful, distracting, sometimes very tempting. They inspire desires in us. They cause us to want to go after them. So this is the first part, that the Tao is not like anything we see in the material world. It is not a color. It is colorless. It is invisible, unseen. Then, the second recap is that the Tao is not something that can be heard. It is silent. It cannot have an actual conversation with you. You can certainly commune with the Tao by examining your feelings. You can experience it. You can feel it deep within. You can represent it to yourself as a voice, but it is not actually human speech. So these are the first 2 characteristics, that it cannot be seen and cannot be heard. And the third one makes sense as well in the series, that it cannot be held or cannot be touched. So it is unseen, unheard, and untouched. It cannot be touched because it is formless. There's no substance to it. It is not a thing. It is intangible. It is more of a concept. And when we talk about concepts, we're familiar with the fact that you can have this conceptual framework that you discuss with other people, and yet it is not a thing that you can see. You can sketch it out to give a representation, but the conception itself is not a physical object. It therefore doesn't make a sound, and you cannot actually touch it. Best you can do when you sketch it out on a piece of paper is that you can hold on to the piece of paper. So now we have the Tao being unseen, unheard, and untouched. Lao Tzu went on to say in this continuing recap that the 3 attributes of the Tao are combined or integrated into one. This brings us to where we ended up last time at line 8. Now, before we move on to line 9, I want to mention additional thoughts from Lao Tzu along the same line. These thoughts were recorded not in the Tao Te Ching that he wrote, but in the Qing. I realize that not everyone has heard of the Qing, so I want to talk about that just to introduce this classic to a greater audience. Here is the original title. If you are not familiar with the Qing, here is the phonetic translation. Qing, where the Q sounds like CH. The meaning of the title is the Clear Tranquility Classic. Alternatively, it can also be translated as the Clarity and Tranquility Classic. Both are valid. It was not written by Lao Tzu, as I mentioned, but by an anonymous Tao master about 1200 years ago in the Tang Dynasty. It is similar to the Tao Te Ching in that it contains summaries of the teachings from Lao Tzu, which was in turn derived from the ancient Tao that was traditional to Lao Tzu, as well as the Tao master. In those teachings, we find the concepts that we looked at last time have led Lao Tzu to additional thoughts. In verse 5, Lao Tzu taught the following. Observe their minds internally, and there is no mind with their minds. So similar to the Tao Te Ching, many of these passages require some explanation to bring them into meaningful context for us in modern times. Here, you can link together this particular thought with what we have talked about, the characteristics of the Tao, by noting that because the Tao cannot be seen in the material world, you have to turn your gaze within to observe the Tao in your own mind. When we do that, we see our own mind in continuous flux, or a state of constant change. This is true pretty much at any time for anybody. Even right now, if you were to turn your gaze within to observe your thoughts, you're going to see the nonstop changings. You've got the fleeting thoughts that come in and out. You've got the swirling emotions. As you're listening to this talk, you will probably gain some insights. There may be parts that are confusing. You will think back to the past at points, have memories, and you may try to recall something and realize that you have forgotten it. There's all kinds of things happening in the mind. The changes in one's mind are a reflection of the never-ending changes in the external world. Now, in the very center of this mental maelstrom, we find the Tao. In the Tao, there is tranquility, there's constancy. It's the quiet like the eye of the storm. Similar to the eye of the storm, everything may be swirling around in this chaotic mixture, but at the very center, in the eye of the storm, there is peace, there is quiet. Then, Lao Tzu goes on to say, observe their forms externally, and there is no form with their forms. What this is saying is that having observed ourselves mentally by turning the gaze within, and with our understanding of the never-ending changes, we can now look beyond the surface appearance of our bodies and see the change that is occurring all the time, despite the body seemingly remaining the same from one moment to the next. We can begin to understand that even if you and I cannot perceive the change that the body is going through, we know it is happening all the time. We know about the metabolic processes at work every minute, every second. We know about the countless cells of the body that are created, that are engaged in their individual tasks, or dying off and being discarded by the body. Now, recall to mind that when we observed internal thoughts, you see the mental maelstrom, and then in the middle of that, you see the eye of the storm. Bring that to the conception of what you observe with your body, with the constant changes the body is going through, the aging process that is happening even now. In the center of all these changes is the constant you that remains the same. That is, no matter how much you change, no matter how you change your looks, no matter how much you age, you are still somehow the same you as always. That's the constancy. That's the unchanging quality in the middle of incredible change. Next, Lao Tzu wrote about how observe their things from afar, and there's nothing with their things. That is, when you turn your attention away from yourself, mentally or physically, to look at everything else, you can have a perspective. For instance, even now, you can observe yourself as if you are watching someone else. You can observe the things around you. You note that the same principle of change, transience, and impermanence applies. Nothing remains the same. Physical objects may provide the appearance, the surface appearance of constancy, that they're the same from one moment to the next. Human perception oftentimes provide that illusion of permanence. Not just objects. You look at other people, they seem to be the same person from one moment to the next, even though intellectually, you know their bodies are going through constant change as well. You look outside, you see a building, it seems the same from one moment to the next. You look beyond the building to the environment, it seems to be the same from one moment to the next. But then, in a large enough time scale, perhaps after a few years, we may find ourselves surprised that everything has changed. People look different. Buildings come and go. Sometimes they get renovated, sometimes they get demolished. Even the environment is not quite what it was before, what it still is in our memories. I have that experience myself when I visit my childhood homes, my teenage neighborhood, and yes, absolutely, the environment has changed. While I was living through childhood and teenage years, I thought that it was constant, but that was the illusion. So now, Lao Tzu continues on with this concluding remark. Since these three are empty, one can only see the emptiness. These three he's referring to is the mental self, the physical self, and the material things. So let's bring it all together. We started out talking about the Tao being unseen, unheard, and untouched. Then we continue to this thought that the mind, the body, and material things are all empty. That actually brings us back full circle to the Tao, the emptiness that cannot be seen, heard, or touched, the ultimate void that contains infinite potentialities. Now you can see how this is all linked together. This translation that you see in this slide comes from my book, The Tao of Tranquility, which is devoted to the Qing. It contains much more, like this next level teaching that we have talked about. There are many other verses of the Qing, plus integration with Buddhist Dharma for anyone who may be interested in exploring further. Now, let us continue on with Tao Te Ching 14, line 9. Line 9 says, above it, not bright. It is the Tao. This is a reference to the Tao. Above the Tao, not bright. This is trying to express that the Tao is not a source of light, like the sun, nor is it a reflection of light, like the moon. There is an old joke dating back to 1875 in a British newspaper that goes like this. You see, the moon is far more useful than the sun because the sun only shone when it was broad daylight, whereas the moon gave light when it was dark. So of course, the moon is much more useful than the sun. Of course, the joke is that we know, or should know, the moon only reflects the light from the sun. Now, bringing this back to the Tao, the bottom line is this. Brightness in the Tao pertains to spiritual, not physical illumination. Whatever lights we associate to the Tao is not physical in nature because the Tao is not a physical thing. When we bring this into daily life, the Tao talks about how we as Tao cultivators should not be drawn to the spotlight. The spotlight is physically bright. It represents flaunting or showcasing the self, a manifestation of arrogance, and therefore contrary to the Tao. So no matter how you look at it, the Tao has nothing to do with physical light. And this makes more sense when we see the Tao as not a physical thing, but more similar to laws of nature. Laws of nature, principles of science, the equations that we use to express that, these are all things that are not physical objects. They don't give lights, they don't reflect light. So the example that I would use here is E is equal to mc squared, which is sometimes referred to as the world's most famous equation. Einstein's equation, it is called the mass-energy equivalence of special relativity. It's talking about how energy is actually equivalent to mass multiplied by the speed of light squared. This is often described as brilliant, but then you and I know that this brilliance is mental brilliance, not physically brilliant, not physically a bright light. In a similar way, when we talk about the Tao, sometimes we use the term energy, but it is only in a metaphoric way. Metaphysical energy, not any kind of physical energy. In the realm of this physical universe, energy can be expressed in various physical ways. Thermal energy will be heat. Radiant energy, light, radio waves, electromagnetic spectrum, kinetic energy, the force of a strike, potential energy when you lift things up to a height, etc. The Tao is none of those. Those are physical world manifestations. The Tao is beyond all of that. Continue on to line 10. Line 10 says, below it, not dark. So right off the bat, we can say, just like brightness, darkness, physical darkness, is not something that can apply to the Tao. What about metaphysical darkness? What about spiritual darkness? Well, the Tao itself cannot be physically bright or dark. I want to bring something to everyone's attention. I want to go back to the last line of Tao Te Ching chapter 1. Here's what it looks like, and here's the accurate translation. Last line says, mystery of mysteries, the door to all wonders. That is how chapter 1 ends in the Tao Te Ching. Here's the thing. Multiple books have translated the same line as darkness within darkness. It is a mistranslation. Let me explain. If all you have ever seen is this mistaken translation, darkness within darkness, then this line that we're studying right now, below and not dark, may seem like a contradiction. So, is it darkness within darkness, but then also not dark? Is that a paradox? It is not. The truth is simple. The translators of the mistranslation have been wrong on this for decades. It's just that the readers have never had a way to tell. And that is because classical Chinese is probably one of the hardest subjects known to mankind. Now, the mistake is apparent to someone who does know modern Mandarin and classical Chinese, like myself, but I do absolutely understand that many Western translators do not know classical Chinese. I'm also sympathetic that learning the subject is many times more difficult than learning modern Mandarin, which is already seen as one of the most difficult languages to learn. This makes classical Chinese almost impossible for Western scholars to master. Now, of course, in Asia today, there are many Chinese-speaking individuals who do know classical Chinese. They have gone through the same rigorous training in that subject as I have from a young age. But the number of people who do know is dwindling, decreasing every year because contemporary education system de-emphasizes that particular knowledge as not being very relevant to modern life. For this reason, when Western translators tackle the Tao Te Ching, they usually rely on a dictionary or other people's work to create their translation. They run into problems because the dictionary pertains to modern Mandarin. It doesn't really take linguistic evolution into account. They produce mistakes. Ironically, their translations make it back to Asia, and due to the worldwide influence of Western culture today, there are many Chinese-speaking people who assume these mistaken, faulty translations must somehow be correct. They assume the Western translators must know something they don't, because, after all, these translators have impressive titles and credentials. It's one of the reasons why Tao, the central term, is so often mispronounced with the T sound, Tao. Mispronounced not just by Westerners, but also by the Chinese-speaking Asians that they influence. It is mistaken because the first person who translated the term 100 years ago, that scholar meant for the later T to sound like D, and then T post apostrophe to sound like T. He called it aspirated versus unaspirated. That rule he created never made it out from academia to mainstream, and that's how we ended up with the widespread mispronunciation. Not knowing this, and according the most respect to academics, a lot of Chinese people just copy the mistake, thinking that's how it's supposed to be. They override their own native knowledge of how the character actually sounds. So numerous examples like that in the Tao we study, and here we see darkness as another example. This is why it is so important for us to set the record straight so that what you and I learn is what the ancients actually intended to express. Moving on. Line 11. Line 11 says, continuing endlessly cannot be named. So there are two ideas here. One is the endless continuation. The other one is the unnamed nature of the Tao. We'll start by taking a look at the first character, Shen. So this sounds a little bit like Shen in divinity, but completely a different character. It just means rope. It is repeated twice in this line for emphasis, meaning continuous. That particular usage, repeating it twice, shen shen, no longer used in modern Mandarin. If you were to say it in modern Mandarin, no one would understand what you mean, but in ancient times, and in this context, it just means that the Tao is endless. It continues on indefinitely. Indeed, it will outlast humanity. It certainly will outlast individual humans like you and me. After you and I pass away, the Tao continues on for the next generation. When humanity itself is gone, perhaps in the distant future, the Tao will persist. It will continue. So now, looking at the entire line together, and let me just repeat one more time that shen, rope, can no longer mean continuous in Mandarin because of linguistic evolution. Now let's explore the meaning of this. Continuing endlessly cannot be named. Well, one thing we know about the Tao is that it is the source of life. And what the Tao sages usually say is, whatever the source of life is, we'll call it the Tao because the world, the universe, seems to be the way. That life is endlessly procreated as the world or the universe continues on. It seems to be the way of existence. So the Tao is the source of life. And therefore, life takes on the characteristics of the Tao. If the Tao is continuous, if the Tao is endless, then it means that life continues on, generation after generation. When you and I observe the world, we see that's definitely the case. We see that individual human beings may come and go within a span of perhaps 80 years or so, but the subsequent generations will continue on, carry on the family legacy. So this is the part about the endless continuation of the Tao applying to life back to the Tao. Then we get to the second concept, the second idea, the unnamed nature of the Tao. And here, a Tao master will remind us that the word Tao is merely a label of convenience. It's just a word. If you want to substitute another word, be my guest. One label is as good as another as long as you have others who understand, buy into it, so that people can communicate back and forth. So, Tao is not the name. It isn't the name of this concept that we call the Tao. We note that human beings are named upon being born. You and I, chances are, we were named upon birth. But what about the Tao? Well, the Tao we know existed before all living things, including us human beings. So, if and when the Tao came into being at some point, there definitely wasn't anybody around to name it. The Tao, therefore, was never named in a similar way as what we're familiar with, which is ourselves. And we can say, label of convenience, we can say Tao is a retroactive human invention. We know that it cannot be the true name. Such a thing, the true name, simply does not exist. Line 12 says it returns back into nothingness. So let's break it down. Everything ultimately comes from nothing. We see this as being true to all the objects of invention that we have ever seen. In this world of ours, we make use of many inventions, and yet we know that we can go back in time to when such a thing did not exist. We go back a century, 100 years, and all the things that we take for granted for our modern convenience, they did not exist. Certainly, we did not have smartphones 100 years ago. It came from nothing in the sense that it did not used to exist. Then one day, ideas came together for components that would eventually go into a modern smartphone. Those ideas came from someone's brain. That person also, when you go back in time, once upon a time did not exist at all. At that point in time, the existence of the person who would invent a component of the smartphone existed as pure potentiality, the Tao. So you apply that to absolutely everything that we see all around us. We go back far enough in time, the Earth itself did not exist billions and billions of years ago. We know this because the Earth is less than 5 billion years old. So there was a time when we did not exist as a world, as a planet. So this basic idea, this overall idea, everything comes from nothing, and the label of convenience for that nothingness, the ultimate source, is the Tao. You and I are no different. We also come from the nothingness of the Tao. At one point in time, you and I existed as pure potentiality, the Tao. Everything comes into the world and eventually returns to its source. Again, nothingness. And we can see that as being true to the objects that we consume, the things we use, the food that we consume. We know that we consume them and they're broken down into components, molecules, they're nutrients for the body, they're used by the body, they're processed in different ways, they transform. And they go back to those components to be assembled into something else. So there is that cycle going on. If it's objects, we know that when things age, get older, break down, they can be discarded. They go into a landfill, they may be biodegradable, they dissolve into component molecules as well. They are transformed, no longer existing as the objects that they once were. So they were created at some point, maybe in a factory somewhere, but then at some point, they're discarded, end up in the trash, no longer existing. Of course, if they are not biodegradable, they last longer. But even 1,000,000 years are just an eye blink in the eternal perspective of the Tao. Eventually, all things integrate, turn to dust, no longer exist as the objects they once were. So the Tao sages would tell us, well, you and I are exactly the same. We're no different. We're not exceptions to the rule. Sooner or later, you and I will return to the Tao, the nothingness of the Tao. And reflecting on our lives, we can see this as true. We come into this world, we make the best of our time here, we do the best we can, and then at some point, we make the return trip. I want to say that this is the most important thing for this entire slide, that a clearer view of this is motivational. It makes us realize that existence is a gift. It should be motivational because it will inspire us to stop wasting time. Let's not waste this precious gift of existence that we've been given. So in the Tao, it is often talked about as the return to nothingness. It is the great circle. I would like to share this as an illustration to show the phases, the great circle of life and death. So we begin with the nothingness of the Tao, here depicted as the metaphysical ocean of infinity. This is the state of zero, the zero state. So not a physical ocean, a metaphysical ocean, and you exist as a drop of water in this endless sea. As such, when you are this drop of water in this endless sea, the idea of oneness is not just a concept, it's an everyday reality that you experience directly as part of the whole. Nevertheless, your individual consciousness is aware of your need to refine and perfect your soul. So when the time is right, you have to manifest in the material world. You have to experience life as a human being. You have to initiate a new cycle. This takes us to the next part, which is from 0 to 1. From the zero state of nothingness, the void, you transition from physical non-existence to existence. It is the miracle of birth, a new life, seemingly from out of nowhere. Then you move into the spring season of your life, from the 1 to the 2. You are one biological entity. You are imbued with yin and yang energies within, so that as you grow physically, you develop the energies within yourself. Spring is a fitting metaphor for this as a season of your life, because that is when life begins to sprout. We then move into the summer season of your life, which is from the 2 to the 3. The 3 is the factor of movement, change, dynamism, and you will experience more and more of this third factor. That is, the yin and yang complementary dualities within you interact and produce dynamism effects. As you grow from childhood to adulthood, you become increasingly active. You embark on your journey. You start building your life. You go through working and resting. That's yang and yin respectively. You go through giving and taking, again, yang and yin respectively, as well as speaking and listening, moving and stopping, planning and executing, all according to the governing complementary dualities within yourself to create, to enable the third factor of change. You therefore give rise to the myriad things in your life, exactly as it says in chapter 42 of the Tao Te Ching. Somewhere along this path, you figure out your purpose in life. You take on your sacred quest, your missions for this lifetime. Time waits for no one, and soon you transition from 3 to 2. This is the autumn season of your life. This is where you adjust the scope of your activities according to what you have already accomplished and take in a view of the remaining tasks yet to be completed. As you age, you become less and less dynamic and energetic, unlike you were in your youth. So you know you need to be more efficient and more effective. You have to do more with less. Thankfully, with your accumulated knowledge and experience, you're able to scale back your plans for greater focus, less busy work, less spinning your wheels, and accomplish that which you wish to accomplish. Then, from the 2 to the 1, this is where you enter into the winter season of your life. As you slow down to a stop, the yin and yang energies wind down as well. You go from a living entity embodying all the complementary dualities within to a non-living entity when you pass on. Your work in this lifetime is done. Finally, 1 to 0. The physical entity that used to be your body, the vessel, it disintegrates, no longer exists as the vessel that you once knew so well. The drop of water, that is you, merges back into the cosmic ocean of the Tao. You bring back with you the lessons you have learned, the growth of your soul, and the refinement of your spirit. This is the great circle. This is the round trip starting from the nothingness of the Tao to the somethingness of existence, transitioning through various phases represented as the seasons of life, and eventually returning back to the void of the Tao. From the formless to the form, and back to the formless again. We're now on line 13. Line 13 says, thus, it is called the form of the formless. Let me break down the important characters here, the last 4 characters of the line. So, the first character in the excerpt, which is the 3rd character in the line, 无, means without, or to not have something. Then we have the character for form, and notice that it appears twice. It also appears as the last character in this line. Between them, we have the character, which is the apostrophe S, but with the direction reversed, syntactically. So the meaning for this, first, the form refers to all material things in the physical world. The things that have form, have shape, have substance. The formless refers to the Tao, the void, the emptiness, the nothingness. Therefore, every form, all the substance in the world is a manifestation of the formless Tao. And we can also express it in different ways. We can say all material things arise from the immaterial. The tangible is always sourced in the intangible. Let's continue on. Moving on to line 14. And by the way, I have skipped the first 2 characters in line 13 only because it is translated simply as this is called, it is called. Moving on to 14. Line 14 says, the image of the imageless. What does that mean? Let's go ahead and single out these characters for analysis. Let's break them down. So once again, the first character there, that's the character 无 for without, or not having, to have none. The second character there is the same as the last character, the 4th character. That's the character for image. And then the middle character there, between them, same as before, apostrophe S. So the meaning is similar. The image refers to all that we can see in the physical world. You can tell this is a poetically matching expression to the previous line. The imageless, just like formless, refers to the Tao. This means everything visible in the world is a reflection of the unseen Tao. And you can also say it as everything that is visible comes from the invisible Tao. As we have talked about, once upon a time not long ago, you did not exist as an individual in this world. So you too were part of this formless and unseen Tao. You exist now, you have taken on human form. You can be seen. You take up space in the physical realm. The illustration that I showed you, you could tell that you went from being a metaphysical drop of water in the cosmic ocean of the Tao to inhabit a human body on Earth. By now, you have lived your life here for many years. You went through many different experiences. This is to say, you have already logged many miles in your journey. And notice that you have arrived at this exact point in space and time, existing right here, right now, connecting with me and everyone else. Moving on to line 15. Line 15 says, This is called enigmatic. It's puzzling because it seems contrary to common sense. Now, we've been talking about the form of the formless, things coming from nowhere, image of the imageless, things reflecting the Tao that cannot be seen. What this is telling us is that what we assume to be real, things we can see and touch, comes from things we cannot see or touch. And we can certainly see an example of this to illustrate it in material things. First, a note on the words that we use. We say the material world when we refer to the physical universe. It is the reality we live in every day. Now, we also talk about material things or being materialistic. And it is no accident that the words are the same or similar, because the material world is inextricably linked to money, material things, as a primary way for human beings to interact with one another. Those interactions go by many names: trade, commerce, economics, and so on. So the conventional thinking is that dollars and cents represent practical reality. We know this is the case reflected in the language that we use. Remember the expression, "show me the money." What it meant was that people want to see evidence that something is valuable or worth paying for. Show me the money. It is not real until, quote unquote, the check clears. We also have expressions like, hey, put your money where your mouth is, because we feel, sometimes justifiably, that promises, words, don't mean a thing until concrete action represented by money changing hands is taking place. So we have this mental conditioning, all of us living in this society, to accept this idea that dollars and cents, that's practical reality. Nothing wrong with that. What I want to do, though, is to say, by presenting the concrete, the seen with the unseen, the touched with the untouched, Laozi is pointing out there is another side to the complementary duality. It is the same point as the perspective of Tao sages, and that is, ultimately, material goods and wealth have no lasting reality. Money itself is built on intangibles. It is built on societal agreement on the value of that. And this is why a $100 bill means a certain thing to be exchanged for certain goods and services, whereas monopoly money don't have the same value. Now, they're both paper with ink printed on it, but one of them has the agreement of human beings engaged in commerce. The other does not, only for games. So the two lines right above this, form of the formless, image of the imageless, highlights the yin and yang. The form of substance of anything associated with monetary resources are ultimately sourced in the formless or the intangible. We see and experience the reality of this today because we're gradually transitioning to a more and more cashless society. So from the dollar bills that we used to physically handle, we now see it more often as a number on a screen, representing a rather abstract notion of value. So the image or the visible is based on the abstract qualities or concepts. So this is one of those things that really require a deeper level of thinking to get at the reality of it. It doesn't make us averse to money or see it in a negative light. It just brings us the clarity that whatever monetary resources we happen to have, it's temporary and transient. The thing to do is to make wise use of them rather than to hoard them, because at some point in time, they're going to be gone, or you're going to be gone. Next slide. Line 16. It says, confronted, its front cannot be seen. Let's break down the 4 key characters there. So we have the character 不, which means no or not. We have the character for see, and then its, and then head, or the beginning. We cannot see its head. And this means it is referring to the Tao. When we try to look for the beginning of the Tao, we cannot see it. We cannot see the beginning of the Tao because its past, its origin is endlessly lost in time. For all we know, the Tao has always been there, eternally present, and perhaps with no beginning. It just always been there. What about line 17? Follow it. Its back cannot be seen. This is similar. We cannot see the end of the Tao. There's no head, there's no tail. We cannot see the end because it is continuing on indefinitely into the future. It is eternally enduring. It keeps going. So the origin is lost in time, and the end is nowhere to be found. So infinity is the nature of the Tao. Now I want to point out that the Tao is within you. You are within the Tao. Therefore, the nature of the Tao is reflected in you too. The nature that we're talking about here is infinity. So this is the reason why Sixth Patriarch Huineng of the Zen tradition taught about self-nature, that self-nature, meaning you, the true you, is neither created nor can it be destroyed. You are not truly born, nor can you truly die. The real you is an eternal consciousness. When we talk about eternity and infinity, we know that the universe began in the Big Bang. That is a well-validated theory for the origin of the universe. Now, I want to bring to your attention some of the latest thinking from the foremost minds of humanity, namely Sir Roger Penrose, Nobel Prize winner. He published a book to talk about a concept of his called the conformal cyclic cosmology. In his conception, the universe iterates through infinite cycles so that there was something literally before the Big Bang. Now, it's a really big subject to get into, but the remark that I'll provide in the context of our discussion here today is that whatever natural laws govern this infinite cyclical process, that will be the Tao of infinity. It has always existed and it will always exist. And what if the same can be applied to you? So this is a serious question that I want to ask you. I know that for many of us, we already do think that the eternal self is infinite in nature, doesn't come as a surprise. I also know that there will be some of us who just aren't sure and, maybe agnostic about that, don't know. The question that I have is, suppose one day you contemplate this question, you've done your thinking and your research, and what if you come to this conclusion that it is indeed the true reality of existence? I want to ask you this what if question. Suppose you come to this conclusion and it is true about your most basic, most essential nature. It is infinite. How would the realization change you? Let's jump forward in time to that hypothetical future when that realization is upon you. The infinite you. Number one, on how the realization can change you. Usually, the very first thing that happens is an altered perception of the timeless. Time. You see the oneness of the past, present, and future. You glimpse your place in the universe and in eternity. You are no longer constrained to view a single lifetime bracketed by the unknown before and after. What happened before you were born? I don't know. What happens after? Not sure. With this realization, the temporal connectedness, you feel a greater appreciation of time itself. You can then use that appreciation, that mindset, to approach everything with more patience and more attachment. Second realization has to do with the soul or spiritual rebirth. You are inspired to explore further. Like, hey, I want to learn more. You wish to better understand spirituality in the totality of existence. How does it work? I know right now, as you're listening to these words, some of you can already feel what I'm talking about. Your mind is like, fascinating. Tell me more. This realization does not necessarily make one more religious. It can, but not always. It definitely does raise one's spirituality in the sense that material concerns no longer have the same overriding power on you. You're able to then put things into perspective. You gain a sense of proportion on what is truly important. In other words, you become a better seeker. You learn to ask better questions as you explore your own spiritual self deeper and more fully. And how does this change you in terms of life? You naturally move away from petty motivations toward greater alignment with a higher purpose. So we're talking about meaning and purpose now, because your expanded perception gives you a different view on life, where nothing has changed, but somehow everything is different. The realization either affirms what you already know about your life's purpose, or it helps you clarify your thinking on your mission in this lifetime. Either way, you are no longer cast adrift. You can take intentional steps toward either the fulfillment or discovery of your sacred quest. We cannot talk about life without talking about death. With death, there's clarity and understanding. There is no more fear for death. There's just no need for that. The end of this body is one of the many transitions for your eternal essence. There is a profound spiritual relief from the pressures of fear. You regain your peace of mind. You attain the liberation of the spirit. You live more fully and authentically. In other words, you really live for yourself and not for the expectations of others. So when you think about the Tao of infinity, think about the infinite you. Moving on. Line 18, it says, wield the Tao of the ancients. We'll break it down as follows. The first character is wield, to take and use. The second character is ancient or antiquity. And I'll make a note here. It's ancient or antiquity. It's a recurring character in the Tao Te Ching. The third character there is the same. It's the apostrophe S. And then last character there, the Tao. When I say that ancient is a recurring character, it appears in 6 more chapters in the Tao Te Ching. Its meaning is the same every time it appears in the Tao Te Ching, referencing the sages and practitioners of the Tao who came before Lao Tzu. It is quite clear from the Tao Te Ching itself that Lao Tzu never presented himself as the originator or founder of Taoism. That is, of course, the reason why he repeatedly referenced his predecessors. Now, I mentioned a moment ago the difficulty of understanding classical Chinese, the lack of accurate information across the cultural divide. It just meant that the older generation of Western scholars never quite understood this point. So one will still find many reference books like encyclopedias that identify Lao Tzu as the founder. Even when the evidence to the contrary is right there in the ancient text, while they can't read it, they don't know what it means. And even when it's clear that the I Ching predated the Tao Te Ching by more than 2,000 years, they still think that Lao Tzu was the founder. It is simply not correct. Now, back to the ancient Tao, or the Tao of antiquity. Here's the important point. the most ancient Tao is also the most proven Tao. Why do I say that? Because the power of the Tao comes from having been tested by countless generations that came before us. This is what Lao Tzu was trying to say. Because by the time that he studied the Tao, there had already been countless generations before him. So he could be quite sure that it is something that works. That's more true for us than for him because it's been 2,500 years since he wrote the Tao Te Ching. The bottom line is that to wield this Tao is to tap into a most powerful tool. And Lao Tzu regarded this as a unique privilege available to all, available to you, available to me. So let's complete the thoughts. Let's go to line 19. Line 19 says, to manage the existence of today, we have to take the two lines together to understand what Lao Tzu is trying to convey, that we must wield the Tao of the ancients to manage the existence of today. Of course, when Lao Tzu wrote today, he was talking about his own time, 2,500 years ago. Now, it's the same purpose that he had to study the Tao back then as our purpose right now. At that time, the purpose for learning the Tao was to better manage one's life. And you and I are no different because we're delving into the Tao for the same purpose. We too can wield the Tao of the ancients to manage our own existence. And to manage the existence of today specifically means being able to challenge being able to handle the adversities and challenges of life so that we can plot a course in our own journey to choose the best path to avoid the dangers. So in that sense, you and I are truly fortunate. As we look at the Tao today, it is more tested, proven, and more powerful than ever. Out of so many ancient books that humanity has access to today, the Tao Te Ching is unique in that every word, every character from the Tao Te Ching applies equally well 2,500 years ago as they do today. There's any number of ancient books out there where one has to take the time of the writing into account. It was written in another time, so some of the ideas and concepts have become outdated. So we have to pick and choose as we read those passages. Not so for the Tao Te Ching. It is more time-proven, time-tested than ever. On that note, we're getting close to the top of the hour right now. So we have to move on to the summary and complete the rest of our discussion, plus the paraphrase and full circle next time. For the summary, first I want to bring back the summary from before to talk about the summary for the first half. As you can see here, familiar concepts. The Tao is not visible, it is silent, it is formless. So these are the three attributes of the Tao, the three characteristics that are integrated into one. And Today, we have gone from there to talk about the emptiness of the self and material things, which brings us right back to the empty Tao that cannot be seen, heard, or touched. What about the summary for our discussion today? It is about the Tao itself, the eternal Tao and you. As you have heard, I want to encourage you to apply the concept of eternity to your innermost self. I want you to think about how this changes the way you look at the world, the way you carry out your day-to-day activities, how you interact with other people. And I also would like to ask everyone to consider the power of the ancient Tao. The Tao is the distillation of ancient wisdom. It's what works for previous generations so we can benefit from their experience. We don't need to make the mistakes that they made. We can avoid them. And we can take advantage of their experiences of success and replicate the same success for ourselves. And the last bullet point here is about the Tao Axiom. We will talk about this more completely next time, but it is about the connections among Tao teachings, that they're all tied together synergistically as a whole. So we want to take this one thing and we want to apply it to every aspect of life. More on that next time. Our meeting has come to an end, but the journey continues on. Until next time, may the Tao fill you with peace and happiness.